Bird got it together, what were some of the first gigs that he got when he really had his act together?
Well, the first gig he had was in July of 1935 at Lincoln Hall, the corner of 18th and Vine, with a kid band led by Lawrence Keyes called the 12 Chords of Rhythm. And Lincoln Hall was a popular spot for Lincoln High School students. A lot of young people went there to check him out. And then he worked around town with Oliver Todd Band at a place called Frankie and Johnny's. And he wasn't very musically proficient at that time. Oliver Todd would be the first one to tell you. And they played, the winter, and they played in the window, and it was so cold they all wore their overcoats. And finally, the leader, the owner of the club, asked them to fire Charlie because he was so unaccomplished. And his friend rode across town and begged the club owner to keep Charlie Parker on. Where he really took off was in 1937. He played a summer engagement with George G. Lee at Musser's Ozark Tavern, which is southeast of Kansas City, about 120 miles. And he came of age that summer. It was a sundown community at heart of Little Dixie in Missouri, and where African Americans ventured out after dark at their own peril. So he stayed on site, practiced his horn, and came back reportedly, according to Gene Ramey, a musically transformed musician. So, and then in 1938, in the spring of 1938, he really got his chops playing at a club called Lucille's Paradise, and it was on 18th Street, right next to the Kansas City's African American newspaper. And he shared the stage with Buster Smith, who was a former Blue Devil and also former member of the Basie Band, and working side by side with Buster that spring. He really learned his craft from the master. There's a whole tradition. And later, of course, he worked with Harlan Leonard and Jay McShann around town, and he was a star soloist around town. The Kansas City Call often covered him, and in ads he was referred to as saxophonist supremist. And Little Charlie Parker is what they called him in those days.
Wow. Now, Bobby, let's talk a little bit about the state of the alto saxophone during that time. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Benny Carter and Johnny Hodges were at the so-called forefront of the alto sax. Am I right about that?
That's correct. Yes. That style, more arpeggiated style, outlining the chords up and down the horn, plus having a beautiful sound. They both were very lyrical, and so that was the dominant thing. And then when Bird came, his tone was still beautiful, but a little more steely, more focused, less vibrato, and also he had a linear approach. And what I mean by linear is note to note to note. Instead of boom, 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 they would be boom, 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 boom. So that's linear as opposed to arpeggiated. And his rhythmic sense was highly advanced. I think he explored rhythms more in the drums, and then the tempos, of course, and his compositions.
Now, before Bird started doing that, writing his own melodies on top of the chord changes of existing standards, was anybody else doing that, Bobby?
Oh, sure. Coleman Hawkins, Ben Webster, all of them did that. Johnny Hodges, Duke, and the most exploited song form of all is blues. It's amazing when you hear how much Duke did over blues. I mean, that's probably the most exploited song form and set of changes. Next to I Got Rhythm. They used to call I Got Rhythm Sears and Roebuck's changes. If you remember Sears and Roebuck's, you could buy anything in the Sears catalog, and so they figure if you want to write an original song, you go to the Sears catalog and they'll send you those changes. You know, the I got rhythm that changes. So that's an early tradition. It goes back to Louis Armstrong. Jazz musicians were always creating melodies over things that were part of the American fabric, the songbook, you want to call it. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Charlie,